Jai Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaur Pamanandi. All glories to the devotees, all glories to the devotees, all glories to the devotees, all glories to Shiva and Shri Gauranga. So, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, Creation of the Universal Form, text number 34. Just give me a second for the computer. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Etevana Swadamena Yadanti Swagurum Harim Shradayatma Vishuryatma Yajshata Sahavitivi Etevana Swadamena Yadanti Swagurum Harim Shradayatma Vishuddhatam Yajata Sahavitibi Etevana Swadamena Yajanti Swagurum Harim Shradayatma Vishuddhatam Yajata Sahavitibi. Word for word, all these Vanaha, orders of society, Swadamina, by one's own occupational duties. Yajanti, worship, Swagurum, with the spiritual master, Harim, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shradaya, with faith and devotion, Atma, self, Vishuddhatam, for purifying, Yat, from whom, Jataha, born, Saha, along with, Vittibihi, occupational duty. Translation, purport of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. All these different social divisions are born with their occupational duties and living conditions from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, for unconditional life and self-realization, one has to worship the Supreme Lord under the direction of the spiritual master. Please repeat. All these different social divisions are born with their occupational duties and living conditions from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, for unconditional life and self-realization, one has to worship the Supreme Lord under the direction of the spiritual master. Purport. Since they are born from different parts of the body of the Supreme Lord in his gigantic form, all living entities in all parts of the universe are supposed to be eternal servitors of the Supreme Body. Every part of our own body, such as the mouth, the hands, thighs, and legs, is meant to render service to the whole. That is their constitutional position. In subhuman life, the living entities are not conscious of this constitutional position, but in the human form of life, they are supposed to know this through the system of the Varnas, the social orders. As above mentioned, the Brahmana is the spiritual master of all the orders of society, and thus Brahminical culture, culminating in the transcendental service of the Lord, is the basic principle for purifying the soul. In conditioned life, the soul is under the impression that he can become the Lord of the universe. And the last point of this misconception is to think oneself the supreme. The foolish conditioned soul does not take into account that the supreme cannot be conditioned by Maya or illusion. If the supreme were to become conditioned by illusion, where would be his supremacy? In that case, Maya or illusion would be the supreme. Therefore, because the living entities are conditioned, they cannot be supreme. The actual position of the conditioned soul is explained in this verse. All the conditioned souls are impure due to contact with the material energy in 3 modes of nature. Therefore, it is necessary that they purify themselves under the guidance of the bona fide spiritual master, who not only is a Brahmana by qualification, but must also be a Vaishnava. The only self-purifying process mentioned herein is to worship the Lord under the recognised method, under the guidance of the bona fide spiritual master. That is the natural way of purification, and no other method is recommended as bona fide. The other methods of purification may be helpful to come to this stage of life, but ultimately one has to come to this last point before he attains actual perfection. Bhagavad Gita 17:9 confirms this truth as follows: Bahunam janmanam ante gyanavan mam prapadyate vasudeva savam iti sa mahatma sudulabha. Just ask the blessings of the senior devotees to inspire us to present the Bhagavad Siddhanta according to the previous acharyas. So it goes this last verse that Prabhupada has quoted, the translation: after many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. So that's basically a summary of the purport, that particular verse. The one who actually follows this process and approaches the Supreme through the via medium of the spiritual master. Prabhupada says this is based on Sastra. This is the only recommended method to achieve the highest perfection for the living entity. So, of course, this verse is very similar to the Bhagavad Gita verse 4.13. Chaitavanyam mayastristam gunakama vibhakashaha tasya kataram apimam vidyakataram avyayam. So Krishna speaks to Arjuna. He says, according to the 3 modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the 4 divisions of human society are created by me. And although I'm the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet their non-doer, being unchangeable. So when Prabhupada established ISKCON, the Hare Krishna movement, in one sense you could say that really what he wanted was a society of Mahabhagavats, at least members of society who are working towards that. So therefore you get the path of Bhagavat Marg, or the path that the devotees, everybody is fully engaged in devotional service with the ultimate goal to achieve Krishna Prem. So, but unfortunately in the material world we're not all potential Mahabhagavats. So therefore we have the safety net, if you like. The safety net is the Varnashram system, or the Varnashram Marg. So that you can conceptualise that the Bhagavat Marg and the Varnashram Marg, they're 2 paths parallel, like a train track. So they're both ultimately going towards the same goal. But the Bhagavat Marg is, one sense, the supreme goal is already there, and completely engaged in devotional service, trying to come closer and closer to the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna under the orders of the spiritual master. So that's Bhagavat Marg. The Varnashram system is ultimately the same goal, but in one sense it's much slower because everybody's on a different platform, everybody's a unique personality, and we're not all on that platform that we can just surrender and give up all our material duties and just engage 24/7 devotional service. So therefore the Varnashram system, the labourers, like the Sudras, the Vaishyas, the Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas, and that's the social order, and then the ashrams, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha and sannyas. So that's the varnashram system, and that's where most of us are situated in one sense. Even if theoretically we know what their highest goal is, we're not able to just give up everything. So these two paths there. So, as I said, Prabhupada, he would have been so happy that everybody was on that Bhagavat Marg platform, but nevertheless, he also, in so many places, he was mentioning the Varnashram system. It's the natural system because Krishna did create it. So ultimately the goal of an ashram system is meant to be engaged in devotional service to Krishna, but in one sense it's done indirectly. Like the labourers, the Sudras, they serve the other three varnas, and the Vaishyas, they engage in mercantile activity, cow protection, agriculture, and they're giving charity to the Kshatriyas, the rulers, the administrators, and also to the Brahmanas. So the Brahmanas are advising the Kshatriyas, the rulers, and the rulers there keeping the whole system afloat under the guidance of the Brahmanas. But of course, you're not going to have a properly operating Varnashram system if you don't have a bona fide Kshatriya, a bona fide ruler, like a Raja Rishi. And basically, Prabhupada did encourage us to establish the Varnashram system in different places. He said it's not really possible in Kali Yuga for different reasons. One is who knows what their actual Varna is. Our birth is very mixed and our qualities are very mixed, so it's hard to understand where we're properly situated and what our sort of duties are in life according to the Varnashram system. And we see that Lord Chaitanya, he didn't really encourage the Varnashram system, basically because the goal of most people in this time is material, under the influence of the three modes. And Lord Chaitanya, he was speaking to the Madhavas, the followers of Madhvacharya, and whilst he respected their opinion, their argument that actually the Varnashram system is the highest, that's the Madhava's Siddhanta, that the highest goal is the Varnashram system. So he respected that, and he himself also took sannyas, which is obviously within the Varnashram system, basically to set an example. And we see that Prabhupada very early on, even after just a few years, he was giving sannyas to young men, basically teenagers in the early 20s, because he understood that the sannyas ashram was essential. They were meant to be the leaders of society. So he said he took some risk. And even those, there was 4 young devotees who considered were behind some sort of conspiracy going on, and in the end, he asked them to leave the movement. He gave them sannyas and asked them to leave the movement at least for some time. It's for their purification. So, the point is that Lord Chaitanya, as Prabhupada, he understood that Varnashram is very difficult in this age, but he was doing his best to present it according to the Vedic system. So generally in material society, at least Vedic influenced society, you have the Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, so the religious principles economic development and sense gratification, ultimately liberation. So this achieved through practicing karma yoga and the varnashram system. So whether people know it or not, in one sense that's what they're following. They may not be able to describe it in that words, but basically, you know, there's some religion there, there's a lot of economic development, and but the main goal is sense gratification. Liberation for most people these days is not even on the drawing board, so to speak. But nevertheless, that's the system. But however, we know that Lord Chaitanya, when he was speaking to Ramananda Roy, he rejected Ramananda Roy's argument that Varnashram was the highest. So Lord Chaitanya, he was encouraging Ramananda Roy to speak, and so Ramananda Roy was started at the Varnashram system. This is the highest. And so Lord Chaitanya said, okay, that's all right, but if you know more, tell me more. Go higher, like that. So one of the problems with the Varnashram system today is particularly those who consider themselves Brahmanas consider themselves as such because of birthright. But this is not the Vedic conception. Simply because your father is a Brahmana, therefore I'm a Brahmana. So, of course, Prabhupada used the example. Just because your father is a High Court judge doesn't make you a High Court judge. First, you have to qualify before you can sit on the bench. So the Bhagavad Gita says guna and karma, qualities and activities, determines what position you are situated in. It's not birthright. So in Kali Yuga, we don't, those devotees who are practicing devotional service under the protection of Krishna, we don't suffer in the same ways as perhaps, you know, the non-devotees do in one sense because of that protection of Krishna. And we're always engaged in, you know, the Yuga Dharma, Harinam Sankirtan, chanting the holy name. And but nevertheless, we can see that Kali Yuga does present more obstacles in so many different ways. You know, sort of demonic governments trying to stop the movement and different things. And it is said that the first attack of Kali, like when Kali Yuga starts, the first focus of his attack will be to corrupt the Varnashram system. And we know, like the Brahmana boy, Shringi, like right at the, you know, with Parikshit. You know, he was cursed by a Brahmana boy. He was just a young boy, but puffed up by his so-called assumption that I'm a Brahmana. So he cursed Maharaj Parikshit. So it is said that Kali entered into, you know, Shringi at that time, right at the beginning of Kali Yuga. And we also know Ravana and Kamsa, the great demoniac personalities in our histories. The first thing they wanted to do was destroy the Brahminical culture. Both Ravana and Kamsa, they sent their warriors out and destroy this Brahminical culture. I think it was it Ravana or Kamsa? He says, actually Krishna or Vishnu won't stop us because he's very scared of us and he's hiding in the Brahmanas' hearts, like that. So this is, so we can see that the first attack on the society by the demonic forces is this Varnashram system. So going back to Lord Chaitanya, speaking to Ramananda Roy, so Lord Chaitanya responded to Ramananda Roy saying that the highest goal was Varnashram. So Lord Chaitanya said that actually the ultimate goal is prema. However, we do know that, as I mentioned, he did follow the Varnashram system to give a proper social example. after Lord Chaitanya sort of rejected Ramananda's Roy, that Varnashram system was the highest. So Ramananda Roy stated that everything should be dedicated to the Lord. Ramananda Roy then spoke of detached action, which of course is karma yoga, then knowledge mixed with devotional service, so Gnana yoga or Gnana Mishra Bhakti, philosophical knowledge mixed with devotional service. And then finally he came to the stage, describing the stage of spontaneous devotional service, or Raganuga Bhakti. And so at each point Lord Chaitanya said, yes, this is all right, but if you know more, go higher, tell me more, like that. So Ramananda Roy was really getting inspired by Sri Chaitanya in this conversation. And so then Ramananda Roy said, well, the highest is that the principle of pure devotional service is that devoid of all kinds of speculation. So yeah, that's okay, but if you know more, go higher. So Ramananda Roy, he explained the higher platform of devotional service, that explained the unalloyed devotional service, love of Godhead, and serving in the Lord in the moods of pure servitude, fraternity, and parental love. And then on Lord Chaitanya's encouragement, he finally came to the stage of conjugal love, that love of Krishna with the gopis headed by Srimati Radharani. And then even beyond that, he described the different categories or the different levels of that pure devotional service, that conjugal love, that in its highest perfection is Srimati Radharani's love for Krishna, which ultimately comes to Mahabhav, the highest level of love for Krishna, which is only exhibited basically by Srimati Radharani. So we can say, because the Varnashram system is created by Krishna, is the perfect system, but it really needs to be applied and managed properly. So as we said, in Kali Yuga it's very difficult because, our mixed birth and we don't really know what our duties are, etc. And we see so many examples around the world where those who might be qualified as Sudras or Vaishyas, they get into power. And so, everything becomes chaotic. They're not qualified rulers. They're not ruling according to religious principles. So therefore, everything becomes chaotic. And also, they have no Brahminical guidance as well. A proper Kshatriya rules according to Brahminical guidance. Shouldn't be independent. We see these different personalities who are, basically tyrants. They're dictators. They're dictating to everybody what should be done. If people don't follow, then they're punished in all sorts of, horrible ways. So, with unqualified people in charge, obviously there'll be no dharma, no religious principles being followed, and therefore there'll be no morality and it'll be very unstable society. So really the only solution in Kali Yuga is hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and practicing the Yuga Dharma, Harinam Sankirtan, as far as possible. In Srimad Bhagavatam 1.3.43, we hear that this Bhagavat Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and it has risen just after the departure of Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, and so on. Persons who have lost their vision because of the dense darkness of ignorance in this age of Kali will get light from this Purana. So basically in this age, all other scriptures are more or less rejected, all the Puranas, Ishopanishad, etc., because a lot of them are sort of corrupted, presented by unqualified people. So really all we have really is the main authority, Srimad Bhagavatam and Harinam Sankirtan. This is the process for Kali Yuga. So when Bani Swami was here a few years ago, I was taking some notes from his class, and one thing I wrote down, he said that the Varnashram system is there to uplift the population from the mode of ignorance to the mode of goodness. But this is a very slow process. So, however, if the Varnashram system is not functioning at all, the populace will become degraded into animal life. So there has to be some sort of dharma, some sort of religious principles there. So that's the mission that Prabhupada has given us to, as far as possible, present at least the message of Srimad Bhagavatam and spreading this chanting of Hare Krishna. So it will stop the whole society degrading down to animal life. So who is qualified to receive this message? So it's an interesting topic. So you may be familiar with the story of Satyakama. Satyakama was a young boy living in the village with his mother. And he saw nearby there was the ashram of Gautama Muni. And Gautama Muni would sometimes come through the village with all his students, and Satyakama had become attracted to that. And so one time he went to the ashram and bowed down to Gautama Muni and said, "Oh Maharaj, I'd like to become a brahmachari, I'd like to become your student in your ashram." So Gautama Muni said, "So young boy, what is your varna?" Because Gautama Muni only accepted Brahmana boys as students, and that's the traditional system. So Satyakama said, "I don't know what my varna is." And so he said, "Go back and ask your mother. Your mother will be the authority." So Satyakama went back to his mother, and his mother said, "Oh, my child, I'm just a maidservant, and for many years I have served as a maidservant in different places with different masters, and at one point I begot you as my son. So factually, I don't know who your father is, and I don't know what your varna is." So in a Vedic context, this is like quite a shameful situation that, you don't know who your father is, you don't know what your position in society. So this is the response that Satyakama received from his mother. So anyway, his mother said, "Well, my name is Jabala, and your name is Satyakama, so I guess your name is Satyakama Jabala. That's your name." And so with this information, Satyakama was just a humble young boy, simple boy. He went back to Gautama Muni and said, "Oh Maharaj, my mother doesn't know who my father is, and she doesn't know what my varna is." And Gautama thought for a minute, and he said, "My dear son, no one other than a Brahmana can speak such truth that you have spoken. Therefore, you are a Brahmana, and I accept you. Go and bring some firewood for sacrifice, and never divert from the truth." So so Gautama Muni wasn't seeing the birth, wasn't seeing his lineage, he was just seeing his qualities. Because, very shameful, I don't know who my father is, I don't know what my varna is, like that. My mother is just a simple maidservant, but because he was very truthful with that, Gautama Muni accepted him. "You're a Brahmana because you're most truthful." And so we have the ongoing debate of the Brahmana versus Vaishnava. Is the Vaishnava, even if one is a Vaishnava not from a Brahmana caste, can they be qualified to worship the Krishna deity, worship Shalagram Shila? Or is a Vaishnava higher than a Brahmana? So these debates have been going on for a long time. So the caste Brahmanas, they're very protective of their position, and they're very adamant. Unless you're born in a Brahmana family, you cannot claim to be a Brahmana. So when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was beginning his preaching, this is one of the oppositions, very powerful oppositions he faced, particularly the Orthodox Brahmanas in Navadvip area, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was initiating these people who weren't born of Brahmana lineage, and he was getting a lot of opposition for that. So I'll just read a little note that I've got that so faced opposition from Orthodox Brahmanas in Navadvip who maintained that birth in a Brahminical family was a necessary criterion for worshipping the deities of Vishnu, refusing to submit to caste hierarchies and hereditary rites. Instead, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati aligned religious competence with personal character and religious merits. So that's what Sastra says, guna and karma. So on the so in September 1911, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was actually invited to give a talk on this topic, but I think due to ill health he wasn't able to go, and he sent his son Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So 8th of September 1911, this was held at Bali Gai in Midnapore in West Bengal, to debate the eligibility of the Brahmanas and that of the Vaishnavas. So, this all come to a big head. They have a big debate about it. The debate was centred on two issues: whether those born of non-Brahmanas but initiated into Vaishnavism were eligible to worship Shalagram Shila, or Krishna deity, Vishnu deity, and whether they can give initiation in the sacred mantras of the Vaishnava tradition. So this was the whole, as I said, there was a lot of pressure in the powerful preaching for Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati on this point, and the caste Orthodox Brahmanas were really feeling that pressure, so they wanted to, ideally they wanted to be victorious in this debate so they could establish their position. So just before Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati went to that conference, he received a letter from his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Said, Saraswati, because pure devotional service conclusions are not being preached, all kinds of superstitions and bad concepts are being called devotion by pseudo-sampradayas as Sahaja and Atibari. Please always crush these anti-devotional concepts by preaching pure devotional conclusions and by setting an example through your personal conduct. So with that instruction, blessings from his father, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati headed off. So in the beginning he was praising the Brahmana's position, and he quoted so many slokas from the Sastra glorifying the Brahmanas, and even the Orthodox Brahmanas were impressed. They had no idea there were so many verses glorifying their position. So he was praising the important position that Brahmanas as repositories of spiritual and ritual knowledge. He used textual references, however, to assert that Vaishnavas should be respected even more due to their devotional practices, thus contradicting the claims of the hereditary Brahmanas present at the conference. He described the Varnashram and its concomitant rituals of purity as beneficial for the individual, but at the moment, unfortunately, the Varnashram system, and this was like over 100 years ago, plagued by misguided practices. So with his very powerful preaching, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was accepted victorious that debate, and the crowd went wild basically. There was more or less a riot going on. Everybody was trying to touch Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's feet, like thousands of them coming forward. And so the organisers, despite Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's protests, they got a bucket of water and dunked his feet into that water, and then he added more water to that, and then they sprayed the whole crowd with that water, and eventually everybody was satisfied like that. So anyway, ultimately this was a great victory for this idea that guna and karma establishes one's position and not birthright. And Just got a few verses. Lord Shiva speaking to his wife. It's recorded in the Mahabharata, Anushashana Parvas 163.8. Lord Shiva, he says that neither birth, purificatory ceremonies, nor learning, nor progeny are qualifications for Brahminical status. Only Brahminical conduct is the basis for Brahminical status. And Maharaj Yudhisthira, also in the Mahabharata Parva chapter 180, he says a person who possesses truthfulness, charity, forgiveness, gentleness, austerity and lack of hatred is called a Brahmana. So this is basically material mode of goodness. I mean, Maharaj Yudhisthira isn't saying there anywhere that according to one's birth one is a Brahmana, just according to qualities and activities. So, and one verse from the Tattva Sagara 2.12 that Prabhupada quotes quite often, he says that just as bell metal is transformed into gold by alchemy, a common man is transformed into twice-born Brahmana by diksha or initiation from a bona fide preceptor. So if one is properly initiated and following the guidelines and the instructions and the standard of medical culture, they should be accepted as Brahmanas, like on the platform of Brahmanas. And we know when Prabhupada was establishing the deities in Vrindavan, so he had all these disciples. And really, he wanted his disciples to do the installation. This is in 1975. But he understood, because of the caste Brahmana mood, the orthodox Brahmana mood in Vrindavan, he hired the local Brahmanas to do that installation, because he wanted that temple to be accepted by everybody, you know, even by the caste Brahmanas. So if he had their own doing it, it'd be accepted. Because he thought if his own disciples were doing it, you know, may not be accepted. But at the same time, while that yagnas was going on, he had his disciples doing Harinam Sankirtan all around Vrindavan. And Prabhupada said, actually, this is the rule initiation. The rule installation is Harinam Sankirtan. So, so just one last verse from Garuda Purana. There are many different kinds of devotees, but even a Vaishnava coming from a family of Malechas or Yavanas, the unclean meat eaters, is understood to be a learned scholar complete in knowledge if he knows the Vaishnava philosophy. For such a Vaishnava is as worshipable as the Supreme Personality Godhead. So once again, Garuda Purana presents that regardless of one's birth, if one qualifies themselves by being initiated by a bona fide spiritual master, Vaishnava spiritual master, and follows the standard regulative principles, then they can be known as a Vaishnava. Garuda Purana continues that better than an ordinary Brahmana is a Brahmana qualified to offer sacrifices, and better than such a Brahmana is one who has studied all the Vedic scriptures. Among such Brahmanas, one who is a devotee of Vishnu is the best, and among many of such Vaishnavas, one who fully engages in the service of the Lord is best. So lots of different levels there. But ultimately, Lord Chaitanya, and based on his teaching, Prabhupada was presenting that the highest goal is Krishna Prem, and we achieve that, as mentioned in the purport today, by following the instructions, taking initiation, following the instructions of a bona fide Vaishnava spiritual master. So just a few points there. We'll end. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
No, just a point.
Just get the
point there. In regard to the deity installation in Vrindavan,
right.
I was there, and they weren't local Brahmins.
Okay. South India.
South India.
Okay.
They were sourced by Yasodananda Swami.
Okay.
And they were very famous.
Yeah.
Very, very famous. Their head priest was very, very famous in the whole group. Prabhupada thought that bring the very famous one. The local hundred will be very sad.
Sure, yeah.
And the main activity was the 24-hour kirtan in the temple.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, you were there, Maharaj, 75?
I was there in the kirtan.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Maharaj, for that correction. Anyway, the same point is there that the locals would accept if, the local Brahma or the established Brahmanas are actually doing the initiation, installation. Yes, Vaishnavi.
Thank you for the class. You're mentioning that not everyone can surrender. I was just remembering in Bhagavatam there's a pastime, I don't remember the name of the king where he wanted to renounce, but then and his father tried to convince him and he still didn't want to, and then Lord Brahma himself came down and asked him to go to become a king and the emperor. So in terms of surrender, it doesn't, from Bhagavatam you can tell that it doesn't necessarily mean externally doing devotional service, or doesn't mean someone's not surrendered if they're doing external duties like King Amrish. So could you talk a bit more about the Yukta Vairagya principle, like the surrender in consciousness, not necessarily externally, because someone can even do devotional service begrudgingly and they're not surrendered?
Sure, yeah. Well, we had the 9 processes of devotional service, so that includes offering prayers. It's not necessarily physically performing activities, but it's the attitude of devotional service what's important. Even if it's some manasa, seva, just in your mind. You have that story of the Brahmana or devotee he was hearing in a talk that even in your mind you can perform devotional service. So in his mind he was worshipping his deities and cooking for them, and everything was done in his mind, and he came to such a high level that at one point in his mind he was stirring the sweet rice, and he just wanted to put his finger in to make sure it was hot enough, and he put his finger in through his meditation, and all of a sudden his finger got burnt. Definitely one just within their mind can come to a very high stage of devotional service. But Prabhupada, he didn't tell us to sit around and meditate all the time. He wanted active devotional service because he understood, at least for the Western mentality, because many of us are coming from not an ideal background, that to be active in devotional service we can control our minds. So therefore he engages in so many different activities. But as you say, not everybody is physically able to do that, or for whatever reason. So many different ways to perform devotional service, but the main goal is, the desire should be that in ultimately achieving Krishna prema, whatever method that is, according to the blessings and instructions of the spiritual master. So many different ways one can do that. And but some people have big strong bodies, and they're able to physically do so much, and others don't, like they're more Brahmanical inclined and they're focused on their study or deity worship. So everybody is different. So that's the thing of the Varnashram system, that there's a place for everybody. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much, Srila Prabhupada. Ki Jai.